Okay. Okay, so now we are in the Alagadupama Sutta. We're doing Sutta number 22, the Alagadupama Sutta, and we're in section 243. Is the sound okay now?
Yes.
Yes, Bhante. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, okay. Tung bhikkhave parigahang pariganheyata.
Tung bhikkhave parigahang pariganheyata.
You are, I'll break it down. Yo asa parigaho,
Yo asa parigaho,
nicho duvo sasato aviparinamata.
nicho duvo sasato aviparinama dhammo.
Sasate samang tateva titeya.
Sasati samang tat eva tit eya.
Okay, so the Buddha starts with an injunction, the optative. This is the verb is in the optative plural. So you should, you could say, possess, take possession of, and then we have the object, the accusative object is tam parigaham, that possession. So you should take possession of that possession, or you should possess, or even you should grasp hold of that possession. Then we have this very difficult to pronounce for me. Yo asa, we break it to the, it's yo asa. So which possession? Asa is the optative singular, third person singular. Yeah, third person singular optative of the verb ati, to be. In this case, would be. Which possession would be or might be, then standard chain of terms for permanence. Permanent, duvo is everlasting, sasato, eternal, aviparinama dhammo, not subject to change, and then which might stand like eternity, which like eternity might stand just so, or more naturally, which might stand just like eternity. So you, speaking to the monks, you monks should take possession of that, or might take possession of that possession, which possession would be permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, and which might stand just like equal to eternity. So the Buddha is saying you can take possession of anything that would last forever. But then he says, Pasata no tumhe bhikkhave.
Pasata no tumhe bhikkhave,
Tung parigaham,
tung parigahang,
yo asa parigaho,
yo asa parigaho,
nicho duvo sasato, aviparinama dhammo.
nicho duvo sasato aviparinama dhammo.
Sasati samang tat eva titeyati.
Sasati samang tat eva titeyati.
So now the Buddha now poses a question, and the no here is the same as, it's not the negative, the negation, but it's equivalent to nu, the interrogative particle. So then he says, do you see, O monks, that possession, which possession might be or would be permanent, everlasting, eternal, and so forth? And then the monks say, no he tung bhante.
No he tung bhante.
And then the Buddha says, so certainly not, Venerable. Then the Buddha says, Sadhu bhikkhave, ahampi kotang bhikkhave, parigahang na samanupasami.
Sadhu bhikkhave, ahang kotang bhikkhave, parigahang nang na samanupasami.
Yo asa parigaho, nicho duvo sasato, aviparinamadamo.
Yo asa parigaho nicho duvo sasato avi parinama dhammo.
Sasati samang tat eva tite.
Sasati samang tat eva titeya.
So he says, good, O monks, I too do not see that possession, which possession might be permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, and which might stand just like eternity itself. Okay, so any questions here? Yeah, this last expression, it's a bit idiomatic. You just have to accept it the way it is. So sasati is eternity, or something that's eternal, and samang is the same as or equal to, and tateva is just so, and titeya would stand, would last, would endure. So would endure just so, equal to eternity. Okay.
Bhante, I
Yeah.
just have a quick question. Is that what kind of a compound would that be? Sasati Samang?
Sasati samang.
Or is it a compound?
It's a compound. But I don't know how to classify it. But just, I don't, I think it's enough just to recognize the meaning. Saman would be equal to, similar to. Sasati is eternity. Yeah, I would just have to guess, but I'm not really sure.
Okay.
Okay, shall we go on then to the next? So we're going to have 3 passages which are pretty much parallel in construction, which the Buddha tells the monks that they could adopt things that are contrary to fact. Okay, so next he says, Tung bhikkhave attavad upadanam upadiyeta.
Tung bhikkhave atavad upadanang upateyata.
Upadiyeta.
Upadiyeta.
Yangsa attavad upadanam.
Yangsa atavadupadanam
Upadiyato.
upadiyato.
Na upajayum.
Na upajayam.
Soka parideva dukkha domanas upayasa.
Sokaparideva dukkha domanas upayasa.
Okay, so here the Buddha says, you may cling to, this is the inoptative based on the verb upadiyati. Yeah, there's a verb upadhyati, which means to cling to. And it looks like it was originally a passive because it has the ia insert, but it functions as an active verb. Somehow it's come to take on an active meaning, to take hold of, to cling to grasp. And the verb is the basis of the noun upadana. And actually upadhyati is the prefix upa plus the prefix a plus deity. Deity is one form of the verb based on the root da, to give. So deity means to give. Then adeity means to take. And then with the prefix upadeity, the sense is to take towards oneself. In other words, to grasp or to cling to. And then attavad upadana is the clinging to a doctrine that's vada, of atta, of self. So the clinging to a doctrine of self. And so if we translate literally, we would render it, you may cling to a clinging to a doctrine of self. But I think here there's a rather peculiar construction in Pali where a verb takes as its object the noun that is derived from that verb. So the way it would read more sensibly or more naturally in English would be, you may cling to that doctrine of self. It isn't that you cling to a clinging, but you cling to a particular object of clinging. In this case, it's the doctrine of self. So you might cling to a doctrine of self, an assertion of self. Then we have yangsa here, which I looked in the commentary. It was not explained in the commentary, but I would take it to be the yang goes with attavad upadana, which clinging to a doctrine of self. And then I take the asa to go with upadyato for this one clinging to it. So asa would be the pronoun going with upadyato, which for one who clings to it, but out of curiosity. Oops. I just want to see if there's any other place where the commentary glosses an expression like this. Yeah, there's a place in the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Eights, where the commentary glosses young sati as young asa. Yeah, so the commentary to Anguttara Nikaya, Book of 8, Sutta number 2, explains Yangsa as Yang Asa. So you might cling to that assertion or doctrine of self, for one clinging to which doctrine of self, there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, suffering, dejection, and misery. So here the Buddha says you can cling to any doctrine of self if when you clung to it, there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and misery. But then he says, do you see, O monks? Again, the no is equivalent to nu, the interrogative particle. But do you see, O monks, that assertion of a self, of that doctrine of self, from which for one who clings to it, to that doctrine of self, there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and misery. Again, certainly not Bhante. Then the Buddha says, good, O monks, I too do not see that clinging to an assertion of self, or I do not see that assertion of self. Okay, I do not see that clinging to an assertion of self from which for one who clings to that assertion of self, there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and misery. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, then we come to the next passage, the next paragraph, which again follows the same structure. So tung bhikkhave ditti nisayang nisayeta.
Tung bhikkhave ditti nisayang nisayeta.
Yangsa ditti nisayang
Yangsa ditti nisayang
nisayato
nisayato
na upajayum
na upajayong
soka parideva dukkha domanassu payasa.
soka parideva dukkha domanas upayasa.
Okay, so here the Buddha says, you may rely, translating literally, you may rely upon that reliance of views, or you may depend upon that dependency of views. But more naturally, we would translate it simply, you may rely upon that view, or you may depend upon that view, from which, for one depending upon that dependency of views, or for one relying upon that view, there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and misery. Okay, then the Buddha says, then he just raises a question, Pasata nu tumhe bhikkhave,
Pasata no tumhe bhikkhave,
tung ditti nisayang,
tung ditti nisayang,
yangsa ditti nisayang,
yangsa ditti nisayang,
nisayato,
nisayato,
na upajayo soka parideva dukkha domanassu payasa.
na upajayang soka parideva dukkha domanas upayasa.
Okay, so then the Buddha again says, do you see, O monks, that reliance upon views from which, for one who relies upon that reliance of views. Or simply, for one who relies upon that view, there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and misery. And the monks say, certainly not, Bhante. And then the Buddha says, I too do not see, do not recognize that reliance upon views from which there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and misery for one who relies upon that reliance of views. So any questions at this point?
Bhante, I noticed in your published translation, for these questions, there is the word well. You may well acquire, well cling. Is that giving the sense of the potential, or is that it's sort of an intensifier?
I'm not sure, actually. That must have come from Venerable Nyanamoli. It must have been in his original translation. I think it's just trying to maybe to underscore the implication of the use of the optative here. Because there's no word in the Pali that corresponds to the well. But I think Venerable Nyanamoli must have been, let me just look in the translation. Or perhaps I added it, I'm not sure. But I think it's not intended to capture a distinct word in the Pali, but I think to underscore the particular flavor of the use of the optative here, particularly since the Buddha is using the optative to indicate a suggestion, to suggest something which is contrary to actual fact. Perhaps that's the purpose of that, the word well.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, the commentary calls this section, it says that this is a teaching of, he calls it a three-pointed emptiness. Uses the expression tikotikang sunyatang. What's the three-pointed emptiness is the absence of any possession that one could cling to, which would be permanent and eternal. Then the second would be the absence of any kind of assertion of self, which would not be a cause for the arising of sorrow, grief. And then the third is the absence of any support of views or reliance of views from which there would not arise sorrow and lamentation.
Ante,
Yeah,
I'm wondering, the word Sukha Paridewa Dukkha Domanas Upayasa, is it a common glossary?
common glossary.
It comes often in the sutta.
Oh, very, very often, probably thousands of times.
I see.
Yeah. Yep. Whenever you get the formula for dependent origination, Jati Pachaya Jara Maranang Sauka Parideva Dukkha Domanas Upayasa Sambhavanti. Yeah, so you always get these. Also in the elaboration of the First Noble Truth. Yes, you have sorrow, and parideva is weeping. Dukkha is explained as physical pain. Domanassa as mental pain, grief, dejection, and upayasa is extreme sorrow or misery. Okay, then we come to the next section. This is 244. This will be, according to the commentary, the Buddha is going to be showing here what's called two-pointed emptiness, which will be the absence of a self and of anything that belongs to the self. So it starts off, Attaniva bhikkhave sati,
Attaniva bhikkhave sati,
attaniyang meti asa.
attaniyang meti asa.
Okay, so here we have, how do we understand attani sati? Anybody?
It's locative absolute.
Okay, how is it a locative absolute? Explain.
Atani is the locative form of atang, and
Right.
sati is the locative form of ati.
Right, very good. Okay, so this is the locative absolute in which we have the noun. The stem form is attan, which we usually get in the nominative, atta. But here it's in the locative. And then it goes with the present participle sati, which has nothing to do with mindfulness. This isn't that sati, but this is the locative present participle of the verb ati, which means there being, or if there is. And so the sense is there being a self, then attaniyang meti asa. Would there be that which belongs to myself? Attaniyang, the word attaniyang is I guess you would call this a possessive noun or possessive adjective. I think possessive noun indicating that which belongs to the self, that which pertains to the self. So if there is a self, then would there be for me that which belongs to the self? And then the asa here is the optative, would be. So if you have a self, then there would be other things that belong to the self. And it seems that the attaniyang here corresponds to the possessions mentioned earlier, parigaham. Okay, so the monks say, yes, Bhante. Then we have attaniyeva bhikkhave sati,
Attaniyeva bhikkhave sati,
attameti asa.
atta meti asa.
Okay, so this is just the counterpart of the preceding statement. So if, and the va is used to connect these two statements, or if there was something that belongs to the self, in that case, would there be myself? So if I claim anything to be my possession, with the sense of my possession attached to it, then it implies that there is the self that is the owner of that possession. And so the monks say, Evang Bhante, yes, Venerable. Okay, then the Buddha continues, Attani cha bhikkhave, attaniye cha, sachato tetato, anupalabhamane.
Attani cha bhikkhave, attaniye cha satchato te tato anupalabhamane.
Yampi tang dititanam,
Yangpi tang dititanam.
so loco, so ata,
So loco, so ata.
so pecha bhavisami,
So pecha bhavisami.
nicho duvo sasato,
Nicho duvo sasato.
aviparinama dhammo,
Aviparinama dhammo.
sasati samam, tadeva tasamiti.
Sasati samang tat eva tasami.
Yeah, here I would pronounce the T because it's a quote within a quotation.
Tateva tasamiti.
Okay, I think would be, okay, nan ayang bhikkhave kevalo paripuro baladhammo.
Nan ayang bhikkhave kevalo paripuro bala dhammo.
Okay, so now the text is saying that when we have a locative absolute here with two subjects in the locative, attani and attaniye, so when the self and what belongs to self, well, let's put it this way, anupalabhamane is a present participle, passive present participle in the negative. So the positive would be upalabhamane, and it's based on the verb. Upalabhati, which is a prefix form of the verb labhati. The verb labhati means to get or to gain. And then upalabhati takes on the particular nuance of to be found, and especially in philosophical context, to be found existing, to be found as a real existence. And then here we have the passive, because we form the passive of the verb, oops, would be upalabhati, and then the present participle is formed with this particular suffix, upalabhamana, and then it's negated with the un. So it becomes anupalabhamana in the stem form. And then with the a ending, that is the locative. So not being found. And then we have these two, they're like ablatives used in an adverbial sense. With sachato would be as truth, as real. And then the commentary is actually, it seems not really certain of the derivation of tetato, but it's used virtually with the same sense as sachato. So the commentary has for sachato, it has mudito as real. And then for tetato, it gives two possibilities that it could be derived from. Tata, which means thus or such, and tira has the sense of firm, steady. But we could simply use as real, as true, and as real. Let's see how. Let's see, Venerable Nyanamoli had, since a self and what belongs to a self are not apprehended as true and established. Okay, so when the self and what belongs to a self are not apprehended, not found existing as true and as established, or as true and as real, then as for that standpoint of views, that tititana, or that case of views, that we came across this earlier, that which is the world, that is the self, having passed away, that I will be, permanent, everlasting, eternal, not subject to change, and I will stand or endure just like eternity itself. So as for that standpoint or case of views, now he says, nan ayan. So this is a sandhi, nanu, plus ayan. Nanu is just an interrogative kind of function word, just indicating that the statement poses a question. So isn't it the case that this particular view is kevalo paripuro baladhammo, an entire and complete foolish doctrine, or doctrine of fools? It's a pretty sharp attack, maybe on the Upanishadic doctrine of the underlying ground of the world, the Brahman, as being the same as the Atman, the self. Does that seem to be the case? And then the monks give the expected answer. So they say, Kinhi no siya bante,
Kinhi no siya bante.
kevalo hi bante puripuro baladhammo.
Kevalo hi bante paripuro bala dhammo.
Yeah, actually, we'll go with this. Yeah, so the king he is king plus he. So the sense is like, how could it not be? Here the no is the negation. How could it not be an entirely and completely foolish doctrine or dhamma of fools? And so in a way, this is a way of sort of undercutting that primary doctrine of the Brahminic tradition. So any questions at this point or any comments?
Bante,
Yeah. Please. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, wait.
oh, okay. You just explained no is negative but in your translation, it seems that you rendered as nu, like a question, because you say, what else could it be?
Let me just check. Yeah, I see that, but I think I would go. Yeah, I don't know. I would disagree with that with the translation. I would go take the no as the commentary doesn't comment on it, but I would take it as the negation. Oh, I see. Maybe so. If you take the king as what? So if you take the no as representing the nu, the what would it be? And then to make sense of the question, you would have to put else. But I think here, to me, it makes now better sense to take the king having a sense of how could it not be than a completely and entirely foolish doctrine. That would be my present understanding.
Your translation use but, so it conveys negation, isn't it? But an utterly and completely.
Yeah, that's not corresponding to any word in the Pali, but sometimes you have to put in words in English, connective words that you won't find in the Pali in order to make sense. Anyway, we could take it either way. It's ambiguous and the commentary doesn't explain. Let me see if the Tika takes it up. This is 244. No, it's not explained in the commentary, in the either. Okay, let us move on then. Okay, what comes next? This is sort of the stock questionnaire on the three characteristics. We've gone through this several times already, so I'm not going to go through it again. If you're new to the class, when we went through the Vinaya Mahavagga, when we came to the Buddha's exposition of the Anatta-Lakkhana Sutta, then we came across the same passage and I explained it grammatically there. So you can just search through the recordings of the series on the Vinaya Mahavagga. So all of this just goes through the three characteristics and the five aggregates till we come to the conclusion that all the five aggregates are to be seen with correct wisdom, not mine, not I, not myself. Seeing it thus, the noble disciple becomes disenchanted with bodily form, feeling, perception, sankharas in consciousness. Through disenchantment, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, he's liberated. When he's liberated, the knowledge arises liberated, and he understands finished is birth. The brahmacharya, the holy life, has been completed. What had to be done has been done. There is no further for this state. One understands. Okay, and then we pick up again in 245, section 245. Now come the group of similes for this disciple, the Arhat disciple. Do you see the place?
Yes, Bhante.
Okay. Ayang vuchati bhikkhave bhikkhu
Ayang vuchati bhikkhave bhikkhu
ukita paligo itipi
ukita paligo itipi
sankina pariko itipi
sankina pariko itipi
abul hesiko itipi
abul hesiko itipi
niragalo itipi
niragalo itipi
Aryo panadajo panabaro
aryo panadajo panaparo
visangyuto itipi.
visangyuto itipi.
Yeah, I have to rely. Some of the words here are very unusual, so I have to rely on published translation. So this monk, this bhikkhu, is called, then we have a number of metaphorical terms, ukita paligo. So paligo, this is translated as one whose shaft has been lifted. So paligo is a kind of shaft. Let's see if the commentary gives. So it explains paligo just as in the sense of being difficult to lift up. Let me rely on my dictionary. Paligo, the dictionary gives a crossbar. And then ukita is the past participle of the verb ukipati, which means it has the meaning to lift up. So one whose crossbar has been lifted up, then sankina pariko, and pariko is a moat. Parika is a strange, the dictionary doesn't seem to have it. Anyway, we'll take the meaning of the moat. So one whose Yanamoli had trench, one whose trench has been filled in. Then asiko is a pillar and a bulha is pulled out. So here Yanamoli has whose pillar has been uprooted. And niragalo is the absence of agala. Agala is a bar which is used to lock a door, to close a door. So one without a bar locking the door. Yes, Yanamoli has one who has no bar. Then we have a noble one whose banner, this is the word daja. Daja is like a flag or a banner that has been, or actually it's like a crest, has been dropped. And then panabara, bara is a burden, whose burden has been dropped, and who is visangyuto, who has been detached, unfettered, freed from the fetters. Okay, then what follows is going to explain the meaning or the application of each of these metaphorical terms. So the text continues, Katancha bhikkhave bhikkhu ukita paligo hoti.
Katancha bhikkhave bhikkhu ukita paligo hoti.
Ida bhikkhave bhikkhuno
Ida bhikkhave bhikkhuno
avijja pahina hoti.
avijja pahina hoti.
Uchina mula tala vatukata.
Uchina mula tala vatukata
Anabhavankata
anabhavankata
ayating anupada dhamma.
ayating anupada dhamma.
Okay, so how is a monk one whose shaft has been lifted, or whose crossbar has been, whose bolt has been lifted? Okay, so here for a monk, ignorance has been abandoned. Then it's uchina mula. It has been cut off at the root. And uchina mula is what kind of compound? What kind of compound? Anybody?
Abahubihi?
Yeah, can you explain how?
Well, it seems to be describing avijja.
Yeah, what makes it a bahubihi?
Well, it's not a word that is standing alone, but it's functioning in reference externally to avijja as an adjective.
Yeah, but something else has to be mentioned.
Ending in a noun, Bante?
Say again?
Ending in a noun?
Right, exactly. Exactly. It ends in a noun. Yeah, it's not enough that it's used as an adjective to describe a noun external to itself, but it has to end in a noun itself in order to be a bahubihi compound.
Bante, then
Yeah.
as a follow-up question, is it possible that a tapurisa compound end in a noun ever?
Oh yeah, many tapurisa compounds can end in a noun.
Right.
Yeah. Let's just I should be able to think of a million tapurisa compounds.
Buddha Vachana.
Okay, good, good. Okay, thank you. Buddha Vachana, the word of the Buddha.
So this word as a standalone compound,
Yeah, Buddha Vachana, ends in a noun, but it's not describing anything external to itself. Buddha Vachana word, Buddha word is describing the Buddha word, or it's signifying the Buddha word. But Uchina Mula, cut off root, is describing ignorance. So Uchina Mula is functioning, though it ends in a noun, but is functioning as an adjective describing ignorance. Whereas Buddha Vachana is just simply the word of the Buddha. Okay, you take the,
Bante,
yeah,
in that case, about the 5 terms to describe the bhikkhu just before, like Sankina, Pariko, Abu, Hesiko, Nirakalo, and Panatajo.
Yeah.
They are all Bahubihi, right? But how about the Sanyuto?
yeah. Visanyuto is not the Bahubihi. It's a past participle. Yeah, it's not a compound at all, in fact. It's just a past participle. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so we have cut off, ignorance has been cut off at the root. Now we have tala vatu kata. Okay, here is what kind of compound is this? Anybody? Take a wild guess. Did somebody speak?
Bahurihi.
No, it's not a Bahubihi. Because it's not, you say it's not ending in a noun, but it ends in a past participle.
Kamadaraya.
No, it's a tapurisa. Tapurisa being used as an adjective to describe avijja. Okay, so in this case, let me take the explanation from the commentary. It actually gives several explanations. So it says, made like a tala. Tala is a palm tree with sisachina, with the head cut off. So the head of the palm tree is cut off, or having dug up the palm tree together with the root, it's made like the base of a palm tree after one has extracted the palm tree together with its root. And so in that, I'm saying, it's made like the vatu would be the area where the palm tree was growing. So it's made like the base of the palm tree, the place where it was growing, after the palm tree has been extracted, drawn up together with its root. So in that place, that base, the palm tree is not seen growing again. So just so ignorance has been brought to the apanyati bhavam, the state of non-discernment, the state where it's not perceived anymore. So whatever explanation is just enough to translate this. It's made like the base or the site of a palm tree. Well, I wonder if the original sense was not rather something not part of this explanation. When you cut off the top part of the palm tree, then what remains, the trunk of the palm tree, doesn't grow again, doesn't bring forth any more branches and palm tree fruits, palm fruits. Okay, then anabhava kata means gone to complete non-existence. It's a bit of a puzzle, this word anabhava, because it looks like a double negation. So abhavang looks like non-existence, then unabhavang looks like the negation of non-existence, which would mean come back to existence. So the exact origin of this expression is a bit of a puzzle, but from the context, it clearly means gone to a state of complete non-existence. Well, we could say it's been totally obliterated, gone to elimination. Then ayating anupada dhamma. So ayating means in the future. Then we have the suffix dhamma with the meaning of having a nature. And in this case, the nature is anupada, non-arising. So it has the nature of never arising again in the future. So putting it all together, how is a monk one whose, we say, whose shaft has been lifted? Here for a monk, ignorance has been abandoned, cut off at the root, made like the base of a palm tree, made, obliterated, of a nature not to arise again in the future. It's in such a way that the monk is one whose shaft has been lifted. So any questions here? Okay, then we'll do the next one. Katancha bhikkhave bhikkhu.
Katancha bhikkhave bhikkhu.
Sankina pariko hoti.
Sankina pariko hoti.
Ida bhikkhave bhikkhuno.
Ida bhikkhave bhikkhuno.
Pono bhaviko jati samsaro pahino hoti.
Pono bhaviko jati sangsara pahino hoti.
Uchina mulo tala vatu kato anabhavam kato.
Uchina mulo talavatu kato anabhavam kato.
Ayating anupada.
Ayating anupada dhammo.
Okay, so in this case, how is a monk one whose trench has been filled in? So thinking pariko is the trench or moat, and sankina is filled in with mud. Okay, so here for the monk, and the subject is jati samsara. So this would be Yeah, here we have a good Tapurisa compound. Sangsaro is the wandering on, and jati is births, repeated births. So the wandering on in births, and jati sangsaro is described as pono bhaviko, which is an adjective based on puna bhava. So puna bhava is a compound of puna, an adverb meaning again or repeated, and bhava, existence. And so to make it an adjective, so puna bhava is a noun, repeated existence, again existence. To make it a noun, the short vowels are strengthened. And really the double consonant should be shortened to a single consonant. And then it has eco. This is an adjective ending. So this is the wandering on in births connected with repeated existence or characterized by repeated existence. So this wandering on in births, this has been, again, abandoned, cut off at the root, made like a palm base, made, eradicated of a nature not to arise in the future. So that's how the monk is one whose trench has been filled in. So the trench is jati samsara, the wandering on in births. So the next is a bull hesiko. So katancha bhikkhave bhikkhu abul hesiko hoti.
Katancha bhikkhave bhikkhu abulhesiko hoti.
So how is a monk one whose pillar, that's asiko, has been abulha, has been lifted, removed, pulled out? And then the answer comes, Ida bhikkhave bhikkhuno tanha pahina hoti.
Ida bhikkhave bhikkhuno tanha pahina hoti.
Yeah, so here everything is pretty much just, you don't have to read the rest, it's all the same. So how is the monk one whose pillar has been removed? Here for the monk, craving has been abandoned, cut off at the root, and so on. So craving is compared to the pillar. Okay, then the next one, katancha bhikkhave bhikkhu niragalo hoti.
Katancha bhikkhave bhikkhu niragalo hoti.
So how is a monk one without a crossbar? Okay. Ida bhikkhave bhikkhuno pancha orambhagiyani sangyojanani pahinani honti.
Ida bhikkhave bhikkhuno pancha oram bhagiyani samyojanani pahinani honti.
Okay, so the rest is the same, but here the crossbar, the agala, is compared to the 5 lower portion fetters. So orang literally means the close or near shore of a river. And then bhaga is a portion or section. And then it becomes an adjective with this suffix iya. And then the subject is sangyojana, the fetters. So these are the 5 fetters pertaining to the lower shore. And the lower shore here is the desire realm of existence. So these are the fetters. What are those 5 fetters?
Sakaya Ditti,
Yeah.
Paramasa,
Yeah.
Vicikiccha, Kama, and Vyapada.
Right. Okay. So it's the view of a self, the wrong grasp of precepts and observances, doubt, sensual desire, and ill will, aversion. So those, of course, as an arhat, he's cut off all the fetters, but for some reason, these are mentioned at this point. So these have been abandoned, and so forth. And notice here, anupada dhammani. Now, dhamma itself as a noun is a masculine noun. So we would have dhammo, or as plural, dhamma. But here, because the compound becomes an adjective describing sangyojanani, which is neuter plural, so dhamma becomes neuter plural, dhammani. Okay, then we have the last of the designations for the arhat. So katancha bhikkhave bhikkhu, aryo, panadajo, panabaro, visangyuto hoti.
Katancha bhikkhave bhikkhu aryo panadajo panaparo visangyuto hoti.
Okay, so how is a monk a noble one who has lowered the banner, lowered the burden, and who has become detached or unfettered? And then, ida bhikkhave bhikkhuno asmi mano pahino hoti.
Ida bhikkhave bhikkhuno asming mano pahino hoti.
Okay, so for this monk, the conceit I am has been abandoned, cut off at the root, and so on. So asmi mana apparently is being compared, to the daja. The daja is like a flag, like you raise your flag or your banner. Here I am. But it's also considered a bara, a burden. Yeah, maybe we'll pause here and then we'll take a little break and then we'll come back and look at the remaining verses from the Sutta Nipata. So I want to finish the Muni Sutta today.
But Bhante, could I ask a question?
Oh, please. Yeah, I should have asked for questions. I'm sorry. Yeah, please.
About that pono bhaviko jati sangsaro
Yeah.
ahino hoti. So jati sangsaro is actually the subject of the sentence because there's no subject, right? Bhikkhuno is dative.
Yeah. Yeah. It's dative or genitive of, for the monk or of the monk.
So
The wandering on in births has been abandoned.
and only jati sangsaro is bahubihi, but pono bhaviko is regular adjective and pahino is regular adjective too.
But jati sangsaro is not bahubihi. Jati sangsaro is
Tapurisa.
tapurisa. Yeah, because it's not, jati sangsaro is not functioning as an adjective describing anything outside of itself. That is the subject itself.
Okay, okay.
You
thank
see that?
Yes, yes. And how about asmi mano pahino hoti? So asmi mano is also a tapurisa.
I think asmi mano, I think this would be called, it's a term coined by modern grammarians. They call this a syntactical compound because the word asmi, grammatically, it's a verb. So it's the first person singular of the verb ati, asmi, I am, and then it's conjoined with the word mano, conceit. So the conceit, I am. So I think K.R. Norman speaks of this as a syntactical compound. Let me just get quickly his grammar. Yeah, this was actually Geiger's grammar, but K.R. Norman added some sections to it. Maybe there are no discussion of compounds, but Perniola, I believe. That's 42. Yeah, Perniola in his polygrammar has a section on page 173 on syntactical compounds. And he says, two or more independent words are sometimes joined together owing to the fact that they have often been used together in a sentence. Such compounds are called syntactical compounds. And he gives as an example asmi mano, and in the description of the Dhamma, ehi pasiko, as another syntactical compound. Yeah, he mentions a few on page 173 and 174. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so let us take a little break here and then we'll resume in 6 minutes at 2:35. So pause the. Okay, we're going to resume now with these last few verses from the Muni Sutta. So now we are at verse number 218. So we can recite together. Muning chirantam viratam vet. Muning chirantam viratam vetunasma.
Muning charantang viratang metusama.
Yes, seems like an extra syllable. Yo bane no ni budgete. Actually, the meter might be different, not the tree scoop meter. Yo bane no ni budgete bachi.
Yo bane no pani budjate kwachi.
Mada pamada viratam vipamutam.
Mada pamada viratang vipamutang.
Tangva pidira. Remember we put Muning Vedayanti.
Tangvakvidira muning vedayanti.
Okay, so the one that the wise call or know as a Muni is the Muni who Charantang behaves, carries on, conducts himself. Viratang, Viratang is abstinent, abstaining from. And then Maituna is sexual union. So the Muni who lives abstaining from sexual union. And then continuing to the next verse, who in youth, so Yobane is youth, and no Pani Bhajate is a sandhi of na plus upa nibhajati. And the base of this is bhajate, which means to be bound. Bhajate is to be bound, to be tied down. And then ni, it has just two prefixes, u plus ni. So the sense is he, and then it has the negation, na. And from the ending, we could see that it's a middle voice form. So it's in the verb is the indicative, third person singular in the present tense, but it's the middle voice. So in youth, he is not bound down, kvachi, anywhere. And then abstaining, again, viratang goes with the ablative. Abstaining from mudda. Mudda has a sense of vanity or intoxication in a metaphorical sense. Pride, vanity, intoxication. And pamada is also based on the same word, mudda. This is what we usually translate as heedlessness. So he's abstaining from vanity and heedlessness, and vipamutang, liberated, release. So the wise call one like that, one such as that, a Muni. So any questions here?
Bhante, when looking at the compound mada pamada, how can one know that the first half is not alcoholic? How do we know that it's vanity?
I think in many places we see it used in that sense. Yeah, in fact, there's a well-known list of types of mada, vanity. Jati mada, that would be vanity due to birth, which means social class in ancient India. Let's see. Gotra, because of one's clan. I think there's Gotra mada.
I see. So the
There's a list of them. I remember there's a list in the Vipanga. Mada because of one's beauty. I think it's Rupa mada, vanity because of one's appearance or beauty. Bahu Sutta mada, vanity because of one's learning. There are various lists of mada like that.
Bante,
Yeah.
Bante,
Yeah.
can I take Munin Charantam as a wandering Muni?
I don't think it necessarily means that they're wandering, but the charantam can be used in a more general sense of just the way one behaves, the way one conducts oneself.
I see. Thank you, Bante.
Sometimes it can have the meaning of wonder, but I don't think that's necessarily the case here.
Thank you, Mante.
Okay, any other question? Okay, then we go to verse 219. Anyaya lokam paramata dasim.
Anyaya lokang param atta dasim.
Yeah, this is regular Trishna. Ogang samudang atitarya tadim.
Ogang samudang atitarya tading.
Tang china gantang asitang anasavam.
Tang chinna gantang asitang anasavang.
Tang va pidira muning vedayanti.
Tang va pidira muning vedayanti.
Okay, so now the Muni is described as one who anyaya lokang. So here anyaya is a absolutive of the verb ajanati, to know, to understand. So the absolutive here is based on the root nya. It could also be. So having known the world, and then he's described as paramata dasing. So dasing is a seer of parama, the supreme atta, goal or good. So a knower of the supreme goal. Ogang samudang atitarya tadim. So Ogang is the flood, samudang is an ocean, and atitarya, again, this is an absolutive based on the verb tarati, which means to cross. Then the prefix ati gives a sense of beyond, and sort of the familiar absolutive would be taripa, but this is an absolutive form with the ya ending. So having, and then he's described as tadi. The word originally meant one like that, but in verse compositions, it takes on a loaded meaning. How did I render it? Yeah, there's a long explanation of it that comes in the Nidesa, the Maha Nidesa, probably the Chula Nidesa too. So that it takes on the meaning of an impartial one, or the one who dwells in perfect equanimity. So I use the rendering the impartial one. And then he's further, so he's one who has crossed the flood and the ocean, an impartial one. Then he's one who is China Gantang. So the Gantang is a knot, and China is cut. So one who has cut the knots. The knots are, of course, the bonds of the defilements that keep one tied to samsara. Then asitang is unattached. Sitang has the meaning of attached. Asitang is unattached. Then unasavang is without the asavas, without the taints. So that is the one that the wise know to be a muni. So he is one who, having known the world, is a seer of the supreme goal. An impartial one who has crossed the flood and the ocean. The one who has cut off the knots, unattached, without asavas. That is the one that the wise know to be a muni.
Bhante,
Yeah.
the knots, are they identical with the fetters?
Yeah, there's a list when we have the different classes of defilements in the technical sections of the teaching. There's a list of what's called the 4 knots, which are abhija is covetousness, or in other words, craving. Vyapada, ill will.
Mhm.
The third is sila, I think it's sila bhatta paramasa kaya ganta, the clinging to precepts and observances as a knot. And then the fourth is idang sach abhinivesa kaya ganta, which I would translate as the bodily knot of dogmatic assertions. So those are listed. I'm trying to find where you can find them. I think in the Sangyutta Nikaya. At the end of the chapter, towards the end of the chapter on the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah. Okay. In the numbering system here, in the Burmese edition, it's the chapter on the Noble Eightfold Path is number 45, Sutta 175. The four bodily knots are abhija, covetousness, vyapado, ill will, sila bhatta paramaso, that's the grasping of sila bhatta, precepts and observances. Some use rites and rituals, which I don't agree with. And then idang sach abhiniveso, this would be attachment to the idea that this alone is truth, anything else is false. So those are the 4, in the formal definitions of the gantas, those are the 4. But I would say that in verses, I don't think we have to tie these suggestive terms down to fixed lists of doctrinal items, but it could just be used in a very broad, suggestive way. So anything that keeps one in bondage is a ganta.
Yeah. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so now any other questions? Okay, so now we come to verse 220. Asamma ubo dura viharavutino.
Asamma ubo duravihara vutino.
Gihi daraposi amamocha subato.
Gihi daraposi amamo chasubato.
Parapana rodaya gihi asanyato.
Parapana rodhaya gihi asanyato.
Nichang muni rakati panine yato.
Nichang muni rakati panine yato.
Okay, so asama is not this, it means not the same or dissimilar. It's a little bit actually sama, which we came across in the Alagadupa Sutta, Sasati Sama, the same as eternity. It's actually related to the English word same. No, here it's negated, not both the two are not the same, but their vihara, their dwelling, not the dwelling place, but the mode of living, and vutino, their conduct, are dura, are far apart, far from each other. And the two that are being compared here are gihi, this is the householder. I'm sorry, I apologize in advance. Daraposi, who is, posi means from the verb poseti, to nourish or to support. And Dara is a wife. So supporting a wife, the layman supporting a wife, and subato is literally the one of good observances, of good vows, referring to the renunciant who is ummamo, who has no possessions, who has nothing called mama is mine. Etang mama, this is mine. So the subato, the ascetic of good observance, is one with ummama, no sense of mind, no possessions. And then it continues. Again, we have to realize this is coming from a particular, maybe point of view, maybe the point of view of those who like compose the verses on the rhinoceros horn, the kind of strong ascetic temperament. So para pana rodaya gihi asanyato. So the householder is asanyato. This is unrestrained. And asanyato has nothing to do with sanya, meaning perception, but it is the same as, it's the negation of sangyata. Sangyata is from the verbal root yang, which means to control, to restrain. And so there's sangyama, would be restraint, and one who has restraint, sangyato, and one without restraint is asangyato. And so the householder is unrestrained in regard to para, are other, and pana are living beings, and roda is harming, injuring. So the layperson is unrestrained. I guess this is a dative, unrestrained in regard to the harming of other living beings. Whereas the muni always, nichang, always protects but maybe nichang goes with yato. Yeah, yato and sangyato are very similar. Sangyato is just a prefix form of yato. So the muni, always restrained, protects panine, protects living beings, or panino. Both readings are okay. So putting the two verses together, putting the whole verse together. So the two are dissimilar, far apart in their mode of living and their conduct. That is, the householder who supports a wife and the ascetic who has no possessions. The householder is unrestrained in regard to the harming of other living beings, whereas the muni always restrained, protects living beings. Okay, we might as well finish 221, then I'll take questions. Okay. Sikiyata nila givo vihangamo.
Siki yata nila givo vihangamo.
Hangsasa no pe hangsasa no peti javang kudachana.
Hangsasa no peti javang kudachanang.
Evang ihi nanu karoti bikuno.
Evangihi nanu karoti bikuno.
Unino vivitasa vanamhi jayato.
Unino vivitasa vahanghi jayato.
Okay, so here there's a simile to establish a basis of comparison. So here we have Siki. Siki is a peacock, and he's described as Nila Givo. This is a good Bahubihi compound. Nila is blue, and Givo is the neck. So if you've ever seen a peacock, you see it has bluish green feathers, so bluish green neck. If you haven't seen a peacock and you're in California, you could visit the city of 10,000 Buddhas, where there's about 60 peacocks walking around the grounds. When I was staying there a few years ago, they would all gather outside the cottage where I was staying and make a lot of noise in the evening. Not only would they make a lot of noise, but they would make a lot of other stuff around the cottage. Okay, anyway, so the peacock with its blue neck, Vihangamo, is Vihang is the sky, and Gamo is going into the sky. So flying in the sky. And then it's the comparison, Yata. And then we have Vihangsa. Vihangsa, sometimes it's been translated as a swan, but more correctly, it's a goose, a kind of an Indian goose. And this is the genitive of the goose. And what is the object here is javang, the speed. And then the no peti is na upeti. So it doesn't approach the speed of the goose kudachana at any time. So just as the peacock with its blue neck flying in the sky at no time approaches the speed of the goose, just so the householder or the layperson na anukaroti, in a sense, doesn't imitate the monk, or it doesn't match, is not a match for the monk. For the muni who is meditating, secluded, vivitasa, in the forest. So just as the peacock with its blue neck flying in the sky never approaches the speed of the goose, just so the layperson doesn't match, is not a match for the monk, for the muni meditating secluded in the woods. Yeah, and please, lay people, don't be offended by this. This is sort of expressing the ancient Indian ascetic strain of thought that has come into Buddhism. But in point of fact, I have to say, I know many, many lay Buddhists who exceed in their conduct and their meditative practice that of many a monk. So don't take the comparison too narrowly. Okay, so any questions about the grammar here?
Bante, is the last sentence a genitive absolute?
I said what?
The last sentence, a genitive absolute?
No, no. You mean the muni no vivitasa manam hijayato?
Yes.
No, I think this verb anukaroti, to be a match for, would go with a dative or genitive. And so that's why we have the string of genitives here. But let me just, I can check on it. For anukaroti, imitates, emulates, equals with the genitive of the person. Yeah, so that is just the genitive here is the natural counterpart or the natural accompaniment of the verb anukaroti, to be equal to, or to be an imitator of. Okay, any other question?
But Bante, no karoti already has bikuno.
Yeah, but bikuno, all of these terms are in apposition to each other. The monk is also described as a muni, and then he's said to be meditating, to be secluded and meditating in the woods. So these are just words describing the monk, but with a genitive absolute, the words in the genitive case would constitute an independent clause in the sentence, an independent secondary clause. Whereas here, this is not an independent secondary clause, but all of this is, in a sense, the object of anukaroti.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the genitives are just matching bikuno. Okay, any other question? Okay, so now we've come to the end of the first chapter of Sutta Nipata. So I will send, when I send the recording, I'll send the second chapter of the Sutta Nipata, both the Pali and my English translation. Okay, so thank you all for joining, and we'll be back again next week.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you, Bante.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bante.
Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Bante.
you.
Bye.
Bante.
Bye.
Thank you, Bante.
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay.
Thank
Bante.
you.
Okay. I have to get off before I'm caught by Kim again. Okay.